Good evening. Welcome to our spiritual story time. Last night we began reading. Oh, good. The sound is turned up. Good evening. Welcome to spiritual story time. Last night we began Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. And the comments this morning came from a number of people outside the United States, not English speakers, who said that this was also one of their favorite books and had read it many times. So I'm glad to see that this story has endured for many, many years. So welcome. I hope your day has gone well. You know what I've noticed is that everything is slowing down. Have you noticed that also? That a task that might have taken 10 or 15 minutes, that we dawdle over our tasks, and somehow time has slowed down, and we may spend an hour doing something quite ordinary, and I think we're better people for it. So I don't know if that's your experience also. You might let me know in comments. Jonathan Livingston Seagull. The years ahead hummed and glowed with promise. The gulls were flocked into the council gathering when he landed, and apparently had been so flocked for some time. They were, in fact, waiting. Jonathan Livingston Seagull, stand to center. The elder's words sounded in a voice of highest ceremony. Stand to center meant only great shame or great honor. Stand to center for honor was the way the gull's foremost leaders were marked. Of course, he thought, the breakfast flock this morning. They saw the breakthrough. But I want no honors. I have no wish to be leader. I want only to share what I've found, to show those horizons out ahead for all of us. He stepped forward. Jonathan Livingston Seagull, said the elder, stand to center for shame in the sight of your fellow gulls. It felt like being hit by a board. His knees went weak, his feathers sagged. There was roaring in his ears. Centered for shame? Impossible. The breakthrough. They can't understand. They're wrong. For his reckless irresponsibility, the solemn voice intoned, violating the dignity and tradition of the gull family. To be centered for shame meant that he would be cast out of gull society, banished to a solitary life on the far cliffs. One day, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, you shall learn that irresponsibility does not pay. Life is unknown and the unknowable, except that we are put into this world to eat, to stay alive, as long as we possibly can. A seagull never speaks back to the council flock, but it was Jonathan's voice raised. Irresponsibility? My brothers, he cried. Who is more responsible than a gull who finds and follows and follows and follows and follows? Pictures. Follows. Oh, bear with me. Stuck pages. Follows a meaning, a higher purpose for life. For 1,000 years we have scrabbled after fish heads, But now we have a reason to live, to learn, to discover, to be free. Give me one chance. Let me show you what I found. The flock might as well have been stone. The brotherhood is broken, the gulls intone together, and with one accord, they solemnly closed their ears and turned their backs upon him. Jonathan Seagull spent the rest of his days alone, but he flew way out beyond the far cliffs. His one sorrow was not solitude. It was that the other gulls refused to believe the glory of flight that awaited them. They refused to open their eyes and see. He learned more each day. He learned that a streamlined, high-speed dive could bring him to find the rare and tasty fish that schooled 10 feet below the surface of the ocean. He no longer needed fishing boats and stale bread for survival. He learned to sleep in the air, setting a course at night across the offshore wind, covering 100 miles from sunset to sunrise. With the same inner control, he flew through heavy sea fogs and climbed above them into dazzling clear skies. In the very times when every other gull stood on the ground knowing nothing but mist and rain, he learned to ride the high winds far inland, to dine there on delicate insects. What he had once hoped for the flock, he now gained for himself alone. He learned to fly and was not sorry for the price he had to pay. Jonathan Seagull discovered that boredom and fear and anger are the reasons that a gull's life is so short. And with these gone from his thought, he lived a long, fine life indeed. They came in the evening then and found Jonathan gliding peacefully and alone through his beloved sky. The 2 gulls that appeared at his wings were pure as starlight, that appeared at his wings were pure as starlight, and the glow from them was gentle and friendly in the high night air. But most lovely of all was the skill with which they flew, their wingtips moving a precise and constant inch from his own. Without a word, Jonathan put them to his test, a test that no gull had ever passed. He twisted his wings, slowed to a single mile per hour above stall. The 2 radiant birds slowed with him, smoothly, locked in position. They knew about slow flying. He folded his wings, rolled and dropped in a dive to 190 miles an hour. They dropped with him, streaking down in flawless formation. At last he turned that speed straight up into a long vertical slow roll. They rolled with him, smiling. He recovered to level flight and was quiet for a time before he spoke. "Very well," he said. "Who are you?" "We're from your flock, Jonathan. We are your brothers." The words were strong and calm. "We've come to take you higher, to take you home." "Home I have none, flock. I have none. Flock I have none. I am outcast. And we fly now at the peak of the great mountain wind. Beyond a few hundred feet, I can lift this old body no higher. But you can, Jonathan, for you have learned. One school is finished, and the time has come for another to begin. As it had shined across him all his life, so understanding lighted that moment for Jonathan Seagull. They were right. He could fly higher, and it was time to go home. He gave one last look across the sky, across that magnificent silver land where he had learned so much. I'm ready, he said at last. And Jonathan Livingston Seagull rose with the two star-bright gulls to disappear into a perfect dark sky. I was afraid we were going to be ending, but it's now part 2. Whew. So this is heaven, he thought, and he had to smile at himself. It was hardly respectful to analyze heaven in the very moment that one flies up to enter it. As he came from earth now, above the clouds and in close formation with the two brilliant gulls, he saw that his own body was growing as bright as theirs. True, the same young Jonathan Seagull was there that had always lived behind his golden eyes, but the outer form had changed. It felt like a seagull body, but already it flew far better than his old one had ever flown. Why, with half the effort, he thought, I'll get twice the speed, twice the performance of my best days on Earth. His feathers glowed brilliant white now, and his wings were smooth and perfect as sheets of polished silver. He began delightedly to learn about them, to press power into these new wings. At 250 miles per hour, he felt that he was nearing his level flight maximum speed. At 273, he thought that he was flying as fast as he could fly, and he was ever so faintly disappointed. There was a limit to how much the new body could do, and though it was much faster than his old level flight record, it was still a limit that would take a great deal of effort to crack. In heaven, he thought, there should be no limits. The clouds broke apart. His escorts called, "Happy landings, Jonathan," and vanished into thin air. He was flying over a sea toward a jagged shoreline. A very few seagulls were working the updrafts on the cliff. Away off to the north, at the horizon itself, flew a few others. New sights, new thoughts, new questions. Why so few gulls? Heaven should be flocked with gulls. And why am I so tired all at once? Gulls in heaven are never supposed to be tired or to sleep. Where had he heard that? The memory of his life on earth was falling away. Earth had been a place where he had learned much, of course, but the details were blurred. Something about fighting for food and being outcast. The dozen gulls by the shoreline came to meet him, none saying a word. He felt only that he was welcome and that this was home. It had been a big day for him, a day whose sunrise he no longer remembered. He turned to land on the beach, beating his wings to stop an inch in the air, then dropping lightly to the sand. The other gulls landed too, but not one of them so much as flapped a feather. They swung into the wind, bright wings outstretched. Then somehow they changed the curve of their feathers until they had stopped in the same instant their feet touched the ground. It was beautiful control. But now Jonathan was just too tired to try it. Standing there on the beach, still without a word spoken, he was asleep. In the days that followed, Jonathan saw that there was as much to learn about flight in this place as there had been in the life behind him. But with a difference. Here were gulls who thought as he thought. For each of them, the most important thing in living was to reach out and touch perfection in that which they most loved to do, and that was to fly. They were magnificent birds, all of them, and they spent hour after hour every day practicing flight, testing advanced aeronautics. For a long time, Jonathan forgot about the world that he had come from, that place where the flock lived with its eyes tightly shut to the joy of flight, using its wings as means to the end of finding and fighting for food. But now and then, just for a moment, he remembered. He remembered it one morning when he was out with his instructor while they rested on the beach after a session of folded wing snap rolls. "Where is everybody, Sullivan?" he asked silently, quite at home now with the easy telepathy that these gulls used instead of screes and gracks. "Why aren't there more of us here? Why, where I came from, there were..." "Thousands and thousands of gulls, I know." Sullivan shook his head. "The only answer I can see, Jonathan, is that you are pretty well a 1 in a million bird. Most of us came along ever so slowly. We went from one world into another that was almost exactly like it, forgetting right away where we had come from, not caring where we were heading, living for the moment. Do you have any idea how many lives we must have gone through before we even got the first idea that there is more to life than eating or fighting or power in the flock? 1,000 lives, John, 10,000. And then another 100 lives until we began to learn that there is such a thing as perfection. And another 100 again, to get the idea that our purpose for living is to find that perfection and show it forth. The same rule holds for us now, of course. We choose our next world through what we learn in this one. Learn nothing, and the next world is the same as this one. All the same limitations and lead weights to overcome. He stretched his wings and turned to face the wind. "But you, John," he said, "learned so much at one time that you didn't have to go through 1,000 lives to reach this one." In a moment, they were airborne again, practicing. The formation point rolls were difficult, for through the inverted half, Jonathan had to think upside down, reversing the curve of his wing and reversing it exactly in harmony with his instructors. "Let's try it again," Sullivan said over and over. "Let's try it again." Then finally, "Good." And they began practicing outside loops. One evening, the gulls that were not night flying stood together on the sand, thinking. Jonathan took all his courage in hand and walked to the elder gull, who, it was said, was soon to be moving beyond this world. Chiang, he said a little nervously. The old seagull looked at him kindly. Yes, my son. Instead of being enfeebled by age, the elder had been empowered by it. He could outfly any gull in the flock, and he had learned skills that the others were only gradually coming to know. Chiang, this world isn't heaven at all, is it? The elder smiled in the moonlight. You are learning again, Jonathan Seagull, he said. Well, what happens here? Where are we going? Is there no such place as heaven? No, Jonathan, there is no such place. Heaven is not a place and it is not a time. Heaven is being perfect. He was silent for a moment. You are a very fast flyer, aren't you? I enjoy speed, Jonathan said, taken aback, but proud that the elder had noticed. You will begin to touch heaven, Jonathan, in the moment that you touch perfect speed. And that isn't flying 1,000 miles an hour, or 1,000,000, or flying at the speed of light. Because any number is a limit, and perfection doesn't have limits. Perfect speed, my son, is being there. Without warning, Chiang vanished and appeared at the water's edge, 50 feet away, all in the flicker of an instant. Then he vanished again and stood in the same millisecond at Jonathan's shoulder. It's kind of fun, he said. Jonathan was dazzled. He forgot to ask about heaven. How do you do that? What does it feel like? How far can you go? You can go to any place and to any time that you wish to go, the elder said. I've gone everywhere and every when that I can think of. He looked across the sea. It's strange. The gulls who scorn perfection for the sake of travel go nowhere slowly. Those who put aside travel for the sake of perfection go anywhere instantly. Remember, Jonathan, heaven isn't a place or a time, because place and time are so very meaningless. Heaven is... Can you teach me how to fly like that? Jonathan Seagull trembled to conquer another unknown. Of course, if you wish to learn. I wish. When can we start? We could start now if you like. I want to learn to fly like that, Jonathan. Jonathan said, and a strange light glowed in his